Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions every Monday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock. We talk about things that might impact you and your condominium or homeowners association. It is a community service program, so you're welcome to call us with your questions. 220-9788, 220-WSTU is the number in the studio, and we'll be happy to get you on the air and answer the questions. You don't have to give us your association. In fact, we prefer you don't, because other people might hear the association name and think it doesn't apply to them. So many people are listening that don't necessarily call in because they're a little shy, so you'd be doing them a favor, and we don't want to discourage them from listening to the answer. So give us a call, and we do need a name to call you, but it doesn't have to be your actual name. Mike may have caller ID, but he doesn't write it down. So
I can't read.
Yeah, you can't read, so it doesn't make any difference. But we will try to help you with your answer if we can. I'm not going to be much of a help. I'm a CPA and a community association manager, but the co-host of the show, now that's the guy that can give you a lot of help because he's an attorney who has spent most of his life dealing with these problems, and so therefore he might actually have heard of them before and be able to help you through it. So Peter Mullengarden is our attorney on the show. He's been, like I said, doing this for a long, long time and has been helping out our listening audience for the last 16 years or so, somewhere in that range, and is here to help you with some of your problems that you may have in your condo or HOA or co-op, whatever the case may be. So feel free to give us a call, again, at 220-9788, 220-WSTU. One of the things that we always tell you is that we'll give you the best answer we can, but it's going to be a radio answer, which means that we make it up. No, it means that Mike is the one that giving us the answer because he's the only one that's got any radio experience. But no, it means that we don't have your documents, so we don't really know exactly what your documents say, and your documents can change the answer 100%. They can be completely different, and HOA documents can be different than condo documents, and they can have different rules and way things are handled, including elections and all kinds of things. So we don't have those. We'll give us the best answer. We'll give you the best answer we can based on your interpretation of the documents or your specific situation. But we can't give you a definitive answer because we don't have those documents. We also may broaden your question a little bit or talk a little bit bigger or around the issue a little bit to make sure we cover some of the things that might be appropriate for someone who's got a little bit different situation but almost the same. So anyway, so bear with us on that too. We'll try to address your question specifically and then maybe some of the other issues. So again, that's the basis of the show. We've been doing it for about 16 years, and we always welcome your participation and your calls and comments. We will start talking about whatever we want to, so feel free to interrupt because it's a much better show if you call. Anyway, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Good, Mark. Morning. I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Yeah, it's kind of funny. We've been doing this, or you've been doing this with us, but you've been doing this for a long time. We've been doing the show for a long time. And I do know it does help. We run into a number of people who have had issues or have questions and have had some assistance from the show. So I know those out there that haven't had taken an opportunity to utilize the program, you should give us a call. I had a situation the other day. We always talk about documents making a difference, and I had a situation the other day where an association was calling a board meeting, and it was an HOA, and so some of the board members decided to call a board meeting when the president was gone, president and I think one of the other officers, but the president was out, and so. They posted the notice of the meeting, but it was kind of interesting because they didn't notify the other board members, the two other board members that were out of town, that there was going to be a meeting, and they felt because of posting it, that was satisfactory, but their document specifically said that all board members had to be notified in person and or in writing, and it also said that only the president could schedule a special board meeting, any kind of interim board meeting. So it's kind of funny because they thought they were going according to what they thought the statute said and according to what the law was, but their documents had some different language in it, and ultimately your documents are going to determine what you do there and whether or not that meeting turns out to be valid or not. So it's always I'm always amazed that people don't really read their documents. Many times, even board members don't read their documents and don't realize what they might say and what difference it could make in terms of what they're allowed to do. Peter?
No, that's not unusual. Especially something where people just assume, right? What the answer is, like with a board meeting. You just do the 48-hour posted notice, right? So you're fine. And every now and then, your documents will have a specific provision that could be more restrictive than what the statute is, and typically the more restrictive provision will control. Not always, but usually. No, that's not unusual at all. That there's some, little something there that's buried in your bylaws or in your articles. And it could be years before anyone really realizes, oh, you really had to do this process when no one had done that process for who knows how long.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That's not that unusual.
Yeah, and it's, but when you're looking at, conducting a meeting like that, in effect, if you haven't called the meeting correctly, then you really can't make motions and all of those kind of things because they won't, you don't have a valid meeting.
Well, there also is maybe not. I mean, it's also the provision that that you may have waived, your objection to the notice if you attended the meeting and you participated in the meeting, especially if you're a board member. Okay, and in essence, you've waived it if you haven't raised it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's that the meeting is illegal. If you want to use that word, kind of depends. Who was there, what happened, things like that.
Yeah. It's interesting though. In that particular meeting, the president wasn't informed about it, didn't know about it, and objected to it when he found out about it. So, Well,
in that case, yeah, he did object.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's why sometimes we say you shouldn't try this on your own. There are certain things that if you're going to, especially if you've got something that's significant, like you're looking at a contract or something like that, you want to make sure that you do it in accordance with your bylaws and with your documents, because you don't want somebody challenging that whole thing later, and particularly if there's an issue of some kind that comes up relative to that contract. So,
now, obviously, you should always be striving to comply with the requirements, whether it's statutory, document, both, obviously. Every now and then, there could be an oops, but you should strive to, make sure that whatever the requirements are that you meet them. And most documents do say that for board meetings, in addition to your typical posting a notice, that the board members typically are entitled to, some type of notice. Over and above what you're are publishing for your membership.
Yeah. It's kind of funny if I've kind of come to the conclusion that if your purpose is to make sure that someone doesn't know or isn't attending or can't have a voice, you're probably making a mistake.
True.
That's
trying to be sneaky and keep someone out of the meeting or something like that.
Whether or not it's it's one of those kind of things where you've got you're trying to keep the members in the dark, or you're trying to keep other board members in the dark. It usually doesn't work really well, but it happens. I know. On another subject, this time of the year, we always talk about the fact that you should be taking a look at and should be prepared for the hurricane season. That doesn't mean going out and buying water right now for an association. That means, getting some of the things done like tree trimming and a lot of the yard maintenance and those kind of things. Now's the time to do the spring cleaning of all of the shrubs and get everything trimmed back, get all the palm fronds cut back and taken care of. And
have you, if you have trees that have large canopies,
yeah,
you give them a hurricane cut, so to speak, so the wind will hopefully blow through the canopy and not, topple the tree over. Because the canopies are beautiful, right? I mean, they're really pretty, but they also act like parachutes.
Yeah.
And take the tree down, then anything that's in the way of the tree on the way down on the ground is also going to be at risk.
It's interesting, Peter, that you talk about that, and some of these trees are really nice, but we're finding out now, after a number of hurricanes have actually gone through, that some of these trees that we thought were perfect for Florida because they didn't have the big canopy, or they didn't have, we thought that they would weather a storm well, have turned out to be just the opposite. So now they're, we're finding associations in a situation where they're having to, either take these trees down, or they've done a lot of damage. We've had a couple of these different things where they don't have a big canopy, but the little bit that they do have twisted the limbs off and blew them all over the place, and through windows and all kinds of good stuff. So, that's another thing that as you're looking at some of the maintenance that you may be doing this summer, many associations do lawn maintenance and lawn replacement and tree replacement and things like that. Now's the time to take a look and get some advice and guidance from some of your other associations and from professionals relative to now maybe what you should put in and what what kind of trees you should put in. I know there was some discussion here in the city of Stewart about the trees they've got, and I think are live oaks, which always got me because live oaks actually die. So, you'd think a live oak would live forever, right? But no, that's the one that I think it's got like a 20-year life or something.
Yeah, that name always kind of makes it kind of like,
Yeah.
So, do you want to buy a dead oak or a live oak?
That's right.
I think I'll buy the live oak.
Yeah, well, it's going to be dead.
The dead oak's less.
Yeah,
but you know what? I think our landscaping would look better with a live oak.
That's right. But give
me that dead pine tree instead, not the live pine.
That's dead. That's right. We'll do that one. Some Brazilian peppers would be nice. They'll hold everything up. They'll hold everything. But anyway, so I know the city's dealing with some issues now that they've had to do here. They're tearing out all of the trees. They had to, they're doing a stormwater system upgrade or fix in downtown, but they're also tearing out some of the trees that were down there and replacing them with different trees because the root system was so huge on these trees. People didn't think about it, but the root system was so big that as these trees got bigger, they're starting to really chew up everything. They're chewing up everything underground. You can't see it. People are wondering, why do you have to do? Why are you doing some of this work? Well, it's because
ficus trees do that. Yeah,
the storm system's just tearing it up. They had looked at palm trees. It was interesting. The original proposal was for coconut palms, and that's a nice tree. People worried about liability issues with the coconuts falling, but frankly, maintenance probably could have handled some of that, but. They are going with a little. I think they're going with some sort of a queen crepe myrtle or something like that, and so that's going to be kind of interesting. But it's the same thing that for a homeowners association or condos association is you got to look at some of those things and see what and kind of plan out when you're looking at landscape replacement. Besides the hurricanes, you've also got to look at what kind of damage or what kind of problems you may have relative to irrigation systems and possibly paving and parking lots and all those kind of things. It's I know that's one of the things that you get into. A common complaint is what if a neighbor's tree is on their property, but it's hanging over on my side. It's dropping stuff in my yard. It's roots are coming over and knocking out my, my plants and my, all my stuff. What kind of
Yeah, we've talked about this. Actually, this is an interesting question. I know we've mentioned on the air before, but maybe it's worth discussing again. The law in Florida, and this is actually common law. This is through case law. There's a couple of cases on it that go back several years. In Florida, and it's actually this way through much of the country, is that a property owner, you, I, whoever, is not liable for the damage that is done by the natural growth of the vegetation, tree or otherwise, from my property. So typically it is tree. So a tree whose root system grows onto or into the adjacent property, or the branches, limbs, grow and extend over to the adjacent property, and like I say, drop leaves, whatever. The owner of the property that has the tree is not liable, absent some unusual circumstance, for that. Now, the property owner who is being affected by it, by the roots or by the branches, has the right, though, to cut back those roots and to cut back those branches to the property line. So if something's overgrowing my house from next door, I can hire someone. My neighbor isn't responsible to hire, but I can hire someone to trim those branches back or trim those roots back. Now, if the property owner who has the tree is negligent in terms of maybe maintaining the tree, in other words, the tree is rotting and dying, and they haven't maintained it, and therefore the tree falls because of negligent maintenance, then they may be responsible for that. Okay, but just for the natural growth, no.
Okay, so what Peter said, for those of you that were maybe not following, is that if you dislike your neighbor,
are you saying that I wasn't clear?
No, you were clear. I'm just saying.
Okay.
I'm just trying to interpret it.
Let's talk about some base accounting terms here.
No. I just want
why my basis is zero as opposed to something else.
Okay, I just want our listeners to fully understand that what you said is that you can go ahead and plant that ficus right next to your neighbor's pool, as long as it's on your property. And
as long as you hang on. Now, assuming
mangroves. Wait a minute, you can plant those mangroves next year.
Assuming that you didn't violate any kind of code, or easement, or you weren't supposed to put a tree somewhere, a setback or something like that. Assuming the tree is otherwise in the right place, and you're not putting in a tree that's illegal, because there are the non-native species, whatever. So go ahead. Yeah, assuming that all other things being equal, yes. If you plant a tree and the roots affect my pool, I'm out of luck unless I cut those roots back.
It's funny. I mentioned that because
I interrupted you again.
No. I mentioned that because it's little things like this that people, when they're buying property, don't think about. They don't really realize it, and
also that runs counter to what some people would think would be what the law should be. In other words, some people might think logically, wait a second, this tree is damaging my property, so it's their fault, right? I mean, that's kind of like you jump from one to the other. And in essence, no. I mean, because of this exception, not exception, but because of this rule about the natural growth of vegetation, not being the responsibility of the owner of the tree. So it does run counter sometimes to what you might think the law should be.
Yeah, and that's the point, I guess, is that a lot of people would not really assume that. The other thing that we have a lot of problem with in Florida, mainly because there are a couple states, they're a little wild states, but there are a couple states that allow for this. But you have no right to air, to view, visibility, breeze from the ocean, all of those kind of things. So you got to be aware of that when you're buying a property down here. I remember years and years ago, there is a plaza that is just north of the Roosevelt Bridge and it's it's kind of on the east side of the new bridge now. But at the time, even before the new bridge was built, there was a 4-story building there. It was a 4-story office building, and when you went up to that 4th floor, those units were for sale. And when you went up to that 4th floor, you had this tremendous view up the river and down the river. It was really a nice view, and so that property would have sold. That building would have sold for way more than really it was worth because of the view. And if you didn't know that somebody could potentially build across the railroad tracks from you and block that view, or that a bridge was going to go in to the south of you and you weren't going to be able to see the other side of the river, you might have substantially overpaid because you were paying for a water view that you're not going to have. And then years later, and of course people say, well, what could they build there? There's hardly any land over there. Well, they built 4-story condos all across there, and now you don't have a view really from that building, and it's completely blocked by other condominiums that are on the other side of the road. So it's funny
actually, and actually, just to interrupt you again, sorry.
That's right.
But how you see this sometimes in the condominium context, and then I guess it could be in the HOA context too. But there's a case, again, goes several years ago, where an owner lived on either a 1st or 2nd floor. I'm pretty sure it was the 1st floor. Brought an action against their association because the association had allowed, I'm not sure if they were sea grapes or whatever the vegetation was, but they allowed them to grow up, and it ended up blocking this lower level unit's view of the water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and because the vegetation grew higher, and the association allowed that, and so this owner brought this action, and the arbitrator ruled that that the owner lost, again saying that they had no right to that view. The board of directors can make a business decision allowing the vegetation to get higher. I don't believe a material alteration was at issue at this point, but typically in landscaping, usually, except every now and then it could be an alteration issue, but typically landscaping decisions are within the board's business judgment, in terms of trimming it and how it appears for the most part. So in that case, going to what you say, there was no right to view, and the association was not liable for, in essence, blocking the view of this lower level unit because it allowed the vegetation to grow.
Yeah,
Anyways, that's one specific condo context where that.
Yeah. Which is a shame because that does significantly affect your property value if you went from an ocean view to no ocean view, or a wide water view.
I'm not saying that the owner should not have been upset.
Yeah,
okay?
right.
But I'm saying from a strictly legal point of view, they didn't have a case.
Well,
now,
go ahead, Peter.
No, I'm done.
Oh, I was going to say, and along those lines, the associations have to be aware that if that unit owner sneaks out there in the middle of the night and cuts all those mangroves down illegally, then the association's going to be responsible for it, not the unit owner. I mean, they can go against the unit owner, but ultimately, the government's going to come against the association for letting that happen.
That did happen to one of my associations. It's funny you mentioned that. This was years ago. I believe this was an HOA, where an owner was upset because the mangroves, behind their home grew up and blocked the water, right? So what they do, they hired their own guy, or they did it themselves, they hired someone, and basically, I guess the term is hat rack, but, just basically chop those mangroves down to, a foot high. And the mangroves are highly protected. And as you said, you really can't, all the trimming of those is highly regulated. Mm-hmm. And the association, I think, ended up paying a significant penalty, if I recall, or fine, to the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, that protects those mangroves. Because the mangroves are important, and we all know that they serve the ecosystem, and they prevent erosion, and they do serve a very important ecological purpose. So anyway, that was a a real life example of what you were just saying, that just because some owner did it, the association was ultimately responsible for what happened to those to those mangroves.
Yeah, and a lot of times associations don't think about that stuff because if they're not on a river or they're not on the ocean, we talk a little bit or a lot about sea oats and mangroves and things like that, but we don't realize that that in many associations here in Florida, even inland associations, there are significant wetlands that have to be preserved as part of the building process and a part of the approval. Usually these associations, you've got these beautiful communities where they've got all this natural vegetation and it looks really, really nice, and there's tremendous amounts of some of them are on golf courses and everything else, but they have wetlands, and a lot of times the associations don't realize that they're responsible for the maintenance of those wetlands, and that includes the elimination of invasive species and all kinds of things like that can come with it. And whenever I am dealing with an association that has that type of situation, or had one recently that just turned over, and of course they already they were aware of it because their developer was on top of it. But I always make the point to let them know that one of the things that they have a responsibility for is to maintain those wetlands and to maintain that property, because they may think somebody else is doing it, and it turns out that if you don't stay on top of that, it gets to be really expensive. And plus, if you're not monitoring it to make sure that somebody's coming out there seeing what's being done, and you're keeping a record of what's being done to those wetlands, that you can have the same type of problem we're talking about with mangroves and sea oats. I had a client out west, way out west, and it was a golf course community, and the one of the owners there got ticked off because some of this stuff was getting into his yard, so he got a bulldozer one weekend, a backhoe actually, and started digging out some of the stuff to get his yard back, to make his yard look bigger. And he took out probably a few. I don't remember how big it was, but it was a decent sized amount of wetlands that he basically just dug out. And the association ended up with about a $60,000 fine for the work for the stuff that he did. And even there, it was a surprise to them because they thought it was the golf course's responsibility, but it turned out it was actually the association's responsibility because they were responsible for that portion of the wetlands. So it's one of those kind of things that when you've got some of these things, whether it's mangroves, whether it's sea oats, whether it's wetlands, that where they are, what they are, because some of them aren't that obvious, where they are, what they are, and how they're being maintained. And you're keeping a record of that so that if you're ever challenged, you can show what you've done and how you did it, and that you've done what you were required to do. Between that and then the other thing is potable water. Between those two things, those are things that a lot of homeowners associations just don't really realize or don't pay a lot of attention to because it's not things that you worried about up north, and so you just don't even think about it. And next thing you know, you don't have enough water to water all your landscape in your yard. So now your yard's dying out. And you don't understand why, and you want to run the water, and you can't because you don't have any water to use. You don't have any water rights. So those are some of the things that I think as we're looking at the summer. That's the reason I was bringing it up. As we're going into the into the rainy season, we start looking at maintenance issues, but we have to be careful. We have to be careful about some of this stuff that has to be preserved. It's you probably can't go into your wetlands and create a bigger wetland by putting in a big ditch of some kind. That's usually not allowed. I've got an association that is in. And this is becoming more and more common. I actually have two associations, not in the same community, that are dealing with having to replace their lakes. Because for those of you that are from up north and you think that the developer put a lake in because they thought it would be pretty, you're wrong. They put the lake in because they needed fill, and that was the easiest place to get it. So they dug a pond so that they could have fill, is what it amounts to, and then realized that after they hit water and the pond filled in, that they could call it a lake and charge you more. So that's kind of how the process works. You actually did buy swampland in Florida. You just didn't know it because you paid extra because you thought it was a lake. But anyway, so you get this lake on your property. Well, what's happening now is that when these things were done, like I say, literally they were done for landfill. They were done to pull out sand or other material to fill other lots. So the developers didn't always go in there and do anything afterwards. In other words, literally after they dug deep enough that it hit water, they just pulled their equipment out and stopped. Well, that's not good enough today. You have to have drainage systems. If it does connect at all to an estuary system, you've got requirements in terms of how you're maintaining that lake, including potentially putting certain types of mesh on the side of the lake to avoid erosion, and to make sure that the lakes are being drained and that the water's moving accordingly, and it's being cleaned out and filtered in some manner. So those things are a surprise, because all of a sudden you look at this and you say, oh geez, that's a great lake, and then somebody comes in and says to you, by the way, you owe $200,000 to fix that particular lake, and all you guys have got to chip in. And that's not just the people that are on that lake. You may not have a view of that lake at all and may be chipping in to help pay for it, so that your neighbor who has that nice big house over there, they're only paying 1/200th of it, and yet there's only 20 places on the lake there. So it's a item that's become a bone of contention for many associations. And I think out west, out in the Martin Downs area out here, they are looking at, from what I understand, significant lake replacement in all of those communities. And again, it's not because the developer did anything wrong. They did everything that they were required to do at the time, but circumstances have changed, and now the government is asking that those lakes be redone and shored up so that they don't leak all kinds of silt and everything else into the estuary system. So that's something for you to be aware of. If you've got an association that has ponds in it, lakes in it, which most do, if you've got any kind of connecting system that's connecting out into the waterways, which it usually does in some manner, then you need to be aware of that and make sure that you're reserving for the maintenance of that. That's a big item that needs to be reserved, because I think in some associations it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not, we're not talking it's $20,000 or, we'll have a small special assessment. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in some communities with the numbers of lakes they have that have to be redone. So, that's something that if you're a property manager or if you're a self-managed association, that you need to start looking at some of those requirements. Those are things that a lot of the property managers are aware of, but a lot of individual homeowners that are self-managing, they may not realize that they have that liability out there. And when they're looking at their reserves, they think they've got plenty of reserve money, and then the next thing they know, they're hit with they'd be hit with a huge special assessment because, all of a sudden there's a few $100,000 worth of work that needs to be done, and there's not that many units, So anyway, so that's just something that we want to talk about as you're looking at some of these items. This is a good time to look at not only what maintenance needs to be done prior to, the heart of the hurricane season and, that needs to be done in anticipation, but as you're looking at things that may need to be done, it's a good time to assess your reserves and look at what kind of items you've reserved for, so that if you do have a hurricane, what kind of money have you set aside for those particular items? Because you may have insurance, but that insurance may have a deductible on it, and it may have exclusions on it, and it may have a situation where where it's got a specific exclusion for a certain type of, a type of thing. For example, most of the time, none of your landscape is included, or, it might exclude docks. If you've got docks in your community, it might exclude, what's the other common thing? Oh, tennis fencing and all of that kind of stuff.
Usually landscaping,
Yeah.
docks, seawall is often excluded.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is a big number. If your seawall gets heavily damaged, but you're right. Fencing, docks, seawall, landscaping. We've probably said that 3 times now.
And docks.
Usually these are exclusions from your casualty property insurance.
Yeah, and docks are an interesting situation, because some associations have docks that are in now, but they may not be able to be replaced.
Right, because they're on submerged land leases.
Right.
So you got to be, you have to look at the provisions of your submerged land lease, and see what it says in terms of maintenance, replacement, insurance.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really interesting about any kind of dock replacement is that it is very hard to find a contractor who can do that. And the reason is that if you're doing work on a dock, you fall under the Jones Act, which is a maritime act, and in a nutshell, what that means is that in the state of Florida, if you're a worker and you get hurt on the job, you're covered under workers' comp, and you can sue for workers' comp benefits. All right, but that's it. You can't also sue the employer because of negligence or whatever else. You can sue for workers' comp benefits, but you can't bring a second lawsuit for the same injury. For civil, you can't re-sue for it, except maritime. Jones Act, you can. So if you and that was for people who were on boats, basically. It was the ability to actually sue, and in Florida, it's true. You can sue under the workers' comp laws, and you can sue under the Jones Act. As a result of that, most workers' comp insurance companies won't insure you if you do work that's covered under the Jones Act. And that actually covers dock workers, and anybody who's, depending upon how long the dock is. If you've got an 80 or 90 foot dock, you may not be able to get anybody to do that at all. And there are certain exclusions into the workers' comp for certain types of dock repair, but most of the time, the last time I've tried to find a company that could do a dock repair, there was one, I think, local, and then the other one was, I was trying to get a leasing company that would handle it, because there was a builder that was going to was building a development with some docks, and I think we had to go to Tallahassee to get an insurance company that would cover it, or a leasing company in this case. But anyway, so it's one of those kind of things that there's things like that get really expensive that you don't think should be that expensive, but they do get really expensive because of the type of work that has to be done, and the costs, or the insurance costs and other things associated with that. So just be aware of that. That's something that comes up. The other thing I was going to mention is I don't know if you saw it, Peter, but we had a fire up here in one of our associations. It made the news because it was an old association, Cedar Point down here, which is a large association and is made up of a number of individual associations. So there's buildings, associations within the community. So the community may have, I don't know how many villages it has. Each one of the villages is a separate association. It may have a few buildings in each one of those villages, depending on the size. And so these were older. It's an older community. And what ended up happening is one of the units caught on fire, and it basically just blew through the top of the attic, the building. Just took all the top portion of it. Unfortunately, it was not near a fire hydrant, so they had to bring in some pumper trucks. I think it took about 6,000 gallons of something like that, 6,000 gallons of water, and of course, all of the top floor was destroyed by the fire, and the bottom floor was pretty much destroyed by water damage. So they're in the process of going to have to rebuild that building, and that is a whole bunch of issues that have to be addressed. And in fact, we'll have to bring Keith Carroll in here to talk about it. Rick Carroll, of course, is one of our sponsors, but we'll bring him in and have him talk about that a little bit in terms of some of those issues that you should look for in a fire policy. But there are exclusions, and depending upon, and some of those exclusions pertain to things like firewalls and things that you have to put in or are supposed to put in. And if your association hasn't done that, or doesn't have that in there, it's possible that some of this stuff could be uninsured, and then it's not going to be the unit owner that's going to have to pay for that. It's basically going to be the association. So there could be an assessment that's necessary in the association. So it's one of those kind of things where when you start looking at some of these, yes, the association does have to cover fire, does have to have fire insurance. They're required to have that. But that doesn't mean that there might not be an exclusion in there that something is excluded because the building is deficient in some manner, or it has some kind of an exception. So anyway, that's just some of the things that you probably should be looking at right now. Is some of these issues relative to hurricanes, some of the maintenance issues you're doing, some of the reserve things you're doing. And also, you should be looking at your insurance situation, make sure that you've got adequate coverage. Make sure you know what the exclusions are. If there are exclusions, make sure you put money aside and reserved for those exclusions, so that you've got the money for that. And then the last thing is, this point in time, you should be talking to your bank. If you don't already have one, not a bank, but a loan, you should have some sort of line of credit that is at least enough to cover your deductible and or your some of your out-of-pocket costs, because you may have money in reserves and you may be able to do a special assessment, but it may take a while to be able to get some of that money on the special assessments. Other homeowners may not be in a position to be able to do that. You may be able to, like I said, you may be able to take some of the money out of your reserves, but it's possible that you're going to need some immediate money just to be able to pay somebody to get rid of the initial debris removal and all of those kind of things. So you should have some sort of backup there just in case that you can get to. I would suggest that you have it with a bank that has some office not next door to you, just in case that they're shut down, so you make sure that the bank itself will be open. But other than that, you just need to be careful that that you don't, that you've got, that you're ready and prepared if you need to for any kind of financial assistance that you may need to provide until your owners can get their feet on the ground and get their money together, and they may not have the money available right away. So it may be a situation that you may have to draw on your line of credit until they can pay their special assessment, or whatever the situation may be. Or you may decide, if depending on what the damage is and what the insurance is going to be, that maybe you're just going to borrow the money until you get your insurance proceeds in. But if you haven't arranged that line of credit, it may take too long to do it, especially in today's banking environment. It may take too long to do it if you haven't already done it in advance. You could be looking at 60 days, and that doesn't help you. So have the line of credit set up. Doesn't cost much. Just think of it as a small additional insurance cost, and get it ready to go so that when you do need it, all you have to do is call your banker and say, hey, I'm going to draw on my line of credit. We'll use insurance proceeds, but I just need to get some money, and get it done. So anyway, that's just some things that you should think about as we're going into the hurricane season. Some of the things that you should plan for, and that you should look at. And then the last thing on that I want to mention is that you also should take a look, if you haven't already, at where you have what I call critical risks. And what I'm getting at by that is there's coverage call it laws and ordinance coverage, which means that if you have damage, uh, you you have insurance that will pay not only replacement, but will pay to bring the property up to current code. Because in some instances, if you have enough damage, your building can be red tagged and it has to be reconstructed. Like this fire we're talking about in Cedar Point. When they rebuild that building, most likely that's going to have to be to current building code, not to the code as it existed in 1969 or 1972, whenever Cedar Point was developed, but rather today. And so that may mean different types of construction. It may mean, in some cases, at that end of Stewart, it may even end up bringing in and raising the foundation of the building. You may actually have to, raise the building up a little bit because it might be in a floodplain that you're not allowed to build that low anymore. So there are some things like that you need to be looking at. And if you've got those kind of risks in your community, you need to make sure you have insurance, and you need to confirm that with your insurance agent. Confirm that you have that specific kind of insurance and that your laws and ordinance insurance will cover that, because it can be extremely expensive. I remember during the 2004 hurricanes that after that was done, there was a significant amount of damage done in one of the older communities in town that's down by Cedar Point. And a couple of those buildings were very close to being red tagged. And had they been red tagged, they would have, which means basically they had over 51% damage. Had they been red tagged, and, so you think, oh, okay, well, we got to pay half of it, it's going to cost us 50%. No, in that particular situation, that building, those two buildings would have had to been torn down because the current zoning required that building be built 3 feet higher than it was built. So you'd have had to raise these multi-story buildings by 3 feet. So that's not an easy task. And so that would have been extremely difficult and very expensive. So you got to look at those kind of things when you're looking at some of your risks now. Also, you need to take a look at laws and ordinance risk. Keep in mind, high-rises, we've got this requirement now that you have sprinkler systems. The implementation of it's been delayed, but if you were to rebuild to code, you have to put those in there. So, again, depending upon what kind of damage you have, you could have a situation where, you get significant damage, but it doesn't completely destroy the building. And one of the costs of that is going to be, putting in a sprinkler system that wasn't there before and you didn't have to maintain, but, you're going to have to then put it in the building when you redo the building. So some of those are the things that you need to make sure that you've either got insurance covering it or that you have got reserves covering it, because it could end up being an expensive proposition.
The law and ordinance coverage is important because all sorts of things could come up depending upon the age of the building, wiring, plumbing, firewalls, you name it. Codes have changed dramatically in the last X amount of years. So without it, you're really not fully covered because those things will be significant costs to the reconstruction.
Yeah, that's
the law and ordinance is important. And one or two other things about the preparation for the hurricane season: make sure your generators are functioning. Test them. Make sure you have a line on fuel supplies. Because without the fuel, your generator can be in amazing shape, but you need fuel. So you need a source of fuel. Also, make sure that your all the records of the association are someplace dry. Don't keep them in an area that's flood prone. Or I guess you can keep up in the cloud, but you may have no power. I don't know how the power situation will affect that. So make sure you have an accurate list of all your owners and where they are. in terms if they're during the summer, there may be other places up north or elsewhere. So you can contact everybody. Make sure your insurance policies are someplace that are high and dry, and all your important papers and records, so that in post-storm scenario you're not you're ready to first secure the property and make sure everyone's safe, the property's safe, and then get on with the reconstruction through your insurance. So you want to have all that stuff readily available to you, not have to worry about all the policies are now gone or.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a plug in for that, but it's that's why it's a good time to get electronic. I know many of us in the association world we've been around a long time. We're not too interested in this newfangled stuff, but having your documents in the cloud with cloud storage, backed up and accessible anywhere you are, is a huge advantage. You could lose all of your records in a hurricane just because it's on site, and you thought you had a backup that worked, and it doesn't. Or you pull your computer out that's got all the data on it, and the computer gets damaged because you're carrying it with you, and you get destroyed, and you think you got backup, and you don't. And
right.
Even if you do, resetting up all your programs, getting everything back the way it was, all your custom stuff could take forever if you have to reinstall that. I mean, it could take days to reinstall some of that stuff. So, it doesn't cost that much to be in the cloud. You can do that. That's very easy. Call C&W Technologies. They'll put you in right away. And then the other thing is, if you're doing electronic banking, it's a whole lot easier to be able to go online anywhere and pay your bills if they're all set to be paid electronically. You can take care of all of that and cover it. So those are some of the things that you want to look at. We'll talk a little bit more about it in the future, but just wanted to kind of cover some of these things today since we are at the beginning of June, and officially it is now hurricane season, so we want to make sure everybody is aware of it. If you didn't know it when you walked out the door and got drenched with sweat, it is hurricane season. So anyway, but we're going to be back here every Monday from 9 to 10 o'clock, even through hurricane season, right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's Heritage Station.